Dr. Dan McMillan. He is an author, lives in New York, writes about history and politics, and he has joined us on this show a number of times. And Dr. Dan, good morning. How are you?
I'm great, Jeff. It's so nice to be with you again. How you doing?
You know what? I'm doing great. Things are going really well. And hey, listen, as we heat up now in this, political season, this campaign season, I am sometimes surprised, oftentimes appalled, and it just keeps getting sometimes worse and worse. And so, Dan, I always appreciate you coming on and sharing your insight and perspective with us. So thank you very much. Let's start with just a little bit of your background, maybe for those who are new to the show and haven't heard previous conversations that we've had.
Thanks so much, Jeff. I mean, there's nothing I like better than talking about myself. It stokes the raging fire of my narcissism.
Absolutely.
So briefly, I my first career, I was an academic historian. That's where the doctor comes from. My field is German history. I taught college for a number of years, then got a law degree, worked as a prosecutor, published a book in 2014, How Could This Happen? Explaining the Holocaust, for a book for the general public about the causes of the Holocaust. And then, but already in 2010, started researching and writing a book about money in politics, which I think is the way that politicians pay for their expensive election campaigns is, I think, the biggest single flaw in our political system, and it's also what sets us apart from every other capitalist democracy on earth, and it's why our political system has become uniquely dysfunctional. And then in the spring of 2020, I saw that writing another book on the subject wasn't going to move the needle, and founded Save Democracy in America, which is my nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization. And we promote, we have one goal, which is to establish at the federal level a system of voter-owned elections, which is simply a system where the government gives every registered voter some campaign cash to donate to campaigns. You can't take it out and spend it, but you'd go on to an online account and assign it to the candidates you want to support. And if we fund the system at the robust levels that we're demanding, then candidates who want to serve us have this alternative pool of money that they can use to fund the kind of expensive campaign you need to have a fighting chance. And their opponent's not going to have an excuse anymore for taking money from big pharma, big oil, or all these other special interests who have been giving us the short end of the stick for the last 40 years. And that's where we are now. That's what I'm doing.
Absolutely. And Dan, thank you very much for that. So, friends of the program, again, if you have a question for Dan, even while I'm on the line with him, if you want to shoot it over to me at jkshow@caf.com, appropriate question, of course, I would be happy to pass that along. Hey, Dan, there's the things that you wish you didn't have to say that you always have to say, right?
I also kind of feel like saying, Jeff, that, I don't necessarily have a problem with inappropriate questions either. They can be the most fun, but
Absolutely. Hey, Dan, so one of the things, and I want to go back to a previous conversation real quick before we move forward.
Yeah.
And it was a statement that was in one of our previous conversations. Once enough Americans see that there is a big, impactful first step we can take to reclaim our say in how we're governed, then the people's urgent desire for change will finally have a clear and practical focus. Explain that to me.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That's so important. What is clear to me, frankly, I've noticed this already since the end of the 1980s, that people around me have been saying, this isn't working. I don't feel represented. The political conversation often doesn't touch on the issues that matter to me. I'm voting for the lesser of two evils, and that discontent has only gotten more and more deep. And, people have gotten more dismayed with every passing cycle, and particularly in the last 15 years, you see Americans, we've given our vote again and again to candidates who promise some kind of systemic change, but only in the vaguest of terms. Hope and change. That promise swept Barack Obama into office in 2008. I'm not saying he didn't have other things going for him, but that's kind of, I think, what a lot of people responded to. In 2016, Donald Trump promised to drain the swamp. Bernie Sanders even promised us a revolution. And Sanders was there again with his promise of revolution in 2020. But none of these candidates had a plan for change. And so change never came. And they had no plan for change because what most needs changing is money in politics, the fact that our government is for sale to campaign donors. And no candidate can lead on this issue because they can't fight the money because they're too busy raising the money. And they can't risk alienating any potential donor. I mean, as a candidate, and so I want to emphasize, I'm not saying this to disparage our elected officials because they are trapped in their dependence on their donors. They are victims of this system just as you and I are. And so I guess the bottom line here is that it's my argument, Jeff, that, the American people have been ready for change for a long time, but no one in Washington, no one running for office has shown us a path to change, has shown us anything concrete that we can do, an actionable demand, an achievable goal. And voter-owned elections is that achievable goal. And will it completely drive big money out of politics? No, by itself it won't, but it will have enough of an impact. If nothing else, it will level the playing field and make it possible for candidates who want to serve us to actually run and win. Because right now, if you don't suck up to corporate interests, you can't get a campaign off the ground. The media will never take you seriously. The public won't even hear your name. If we can just level the playing field, and I think we can do more than that, then suddenly Americans are not going to feel defeated by the political system, which I think is how all too many of us feel now. And so I guess to sum it up, I think that voter-owned elections is what's been missing all these years. We've got this desire for change, this very sensible recognition by the American people that this is not working, and it's a bipartisan consensus. No matter how much we disagree about other things, I think we agree on this. And all that we've needed is just a goal that we can act on. And I say that this is that goal. And so my job is to get the word out in various ways. I have a number of different ways that I'm doing that. And I thank you for having me on your show so that I have the opportunity to get the word out. And we've got a very interesting play in New Hampshire that we can talk about if we have time.
Yeah, and I'd like to. Let's go ahead and segue over to that. And then I'm going to come back around on some interesting comments from the United Auto Workers Union president, Sean Fain. But we'll get to that in just a little bit. So I had noticed in some of the notes your partnership with your New Hampshire allies. Now, first off, let's bring our listeners up to speed why New Hampshire is so important, and then let us know what you're doing there.
Okay. Well, the thing about New Hampshire is that it's, as you know, every 4 years for at least 8 months, the eyes of the nation are on New Hampshire. And if we can build by, say, the middle or even by the end of 2027, get enough New Hampshire voters to say to presidential primary candidates in the next round and to say to the media, I don't want my government to be for sale. I want my country back. I want my rightful say in how I am governed. I want voter-owned elections. And the thing is, it's a small state. It's only 850,000 registered voters. You don't need that big a fraction of that number to move the needle. We get enough voters to say that. The candidates cannot run away from the money issue the way they normally do as fast as they can. The national media are going to talk about it, and then we are in the conversation. We are on the agenda in a presidential election year nationwide. So it's in New Hampshire, and this would also be true of Iowa, but I'm focusing on New Hampshire probably because it's only a 5-hour drive from me in New York. We get so much bang for the buck. And if we can just sway enough people in New Hampshire, then we can force it onto the national agenda. Because the biggest challenge we face, Jeff, is above all the pessimism that has become so widespread among Americans. Because we've been lied to for 60 years, and we've gotten so many empty promises and broken promises and empty slogans, and we've been promised change by one candidate after another. And now people feel radically disempowered, in part because we are disempowered. And what we need to do is get enough people talking about it that Americans can then see this is not a pipe dream. This can really happen. And I think that once we do that, we can turn despair into hope. Because ultimately, Jeff, you look at our history, pessimism is not natural for the American people. Historically, we are a nation of optimists. We're a can-do people. And we've just, when it comes to politics, we've been beaten down by the dysfunction of our system. But if we get the word out enough, and in this way, and elevate it enough, and give it a high enough profile, I think that support for this can snowball very quickly.
Absolutely. I saw a figure here recently, Dan, I think I reported on it a couple weeks ago, and it's pretty much common knowledge, but a presidential campaign now costs somewhere in excess of $1 billion to run. I mean, that number's obscene. First off, most people can't even get their arms around that number anyways, way too many zeros. But just to try to sway our vote. And we were talking with one of the listeners before you came on about how these campaigns are run now. They're just basically mudslinging. Like, it's not even as much about this is what I'm going to do for you. And listen, I'm tired of empty promises too, but I'm more tired of you can't even talk to me about what you're going to do for me because you're too busy telling me that the other guy is the devil, and it's absurd.
It's dispiriting, and the last three cycles have gotten more and more negative, and I think that it's no coincidence that during the last three federal election cycles, each shattered previous fundraising and spending records. And $1 billion was the ticket of entry to the White House, but Jeff Katzenberg, Biden's finance chair, has proudly boasted that they're going to raise at least $2 billion for this cycle for Biden's campaign, and I'm sure that Trump's campaign won't raise any less. And I think that the negativity has risen in tandem with the costs skyrocketing, and this is no accident, because the thing is that people don't understand is that, it's hard to understand, is that because you have to raise so much money to have a viable campaign, you owe so many promises to so many donors, and altogether you censor yourself so as not to alienate a potential donor, that now once they get to D.C., our elected officials are hogtied they're so hemmed in by not wanting to alienate special interests of various kinds that neither party really has much in the way of an achievable positive program they can implement. I mean, they both have programs, but as far as what they can make happen, because for everything that we might want to do to make our country stronger, there's going to be a group of donors who will block it. I mean, the healthcare system is an object lesson in this. And I think that because of this, because interest group gridlock has more and more paralyzed our government in Washington, the parties have defaulted to negative messaging because anger is all they have left to offer us. And it's only going to get worse. And the 2020 midterm was already, the anger was escalating almost from week to week. And come election day, people were talking about, oh my God, we're going to have civil war in this country. And we've calmed down about that a little bit in the last 6-8 months, but now it's heating up again. And as far as ugliness goes, I think we ain't seen nothing yet.
Absolutely. Hey, Dan, do you have a few minutes? I've got to get an ABC News break in. I would love to come back on the other side of this break.
Absolutely, Jeff. No, absolutely. I'm here.
Very, very good. We're going to continue with Dr. Dan McMillan. He is the founder of Saving Democracy in America. I've got your emails. I want to get some of those questions out as well. A couple other things that we want to bounce off Dr. McMillan. You have time. You're going to have a few minutes during this ABC News break to get me a few more of your emails or texts. We'll be back. This is The Legend, 93.5 AM 930.
ABC News, I'm Justin Finch. World leaders gathering today for the UN General Assembly. President Biden speaks this morning. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky this afternoon. 5 Americans who've been held as hostages in Iran now back on American soil. ABC's Rhiannon Alley with more on the prisoner exchange.
As part of the swap, the Biden administration is granting clemency to 5 Iranians held in the U.S., and it will unfreeze $6 billion in Iranian oil revenues. The Biden administration says says Iran has agreed to use the money only for humanitarian needs like food and medicine.
They're not getting cash. They can't just cut a check and pull out the money for whatever they want, whenever they want.
Republicans call it a ransom payment and warn Iran will use the money to fund terrorism.
The Fed begins its two-day September meeting today, after which it could decide to raise interest rates or keep them the same. The price of gas up 6 cents a gallon in the past week. This is ABC News. More trouble for Rudy Giuliani, the former lawyer for Donald Trump, now being sued by the law firm that's represented him in several investigations. It says Giuliani owes his lawyers around $1.4 million. Giuliani calls the bills excessive. That missing stealth jet found in South Carolina.
In Williamsburg County, South Carolina, Randolph White was at home on Sunday when
I heard a plane coming across. Seemed like it was flying relatively low.
he says that's not so unusual with all the military activity in his area, but
Then I heard a boom sound.
which he assumed was a sonic boom. The $100 million fighter jet is thought to have flown 80 miles after the pilot ejected because of an unspecified mishap in the cockpit. The plane then crashed in a field. Jim Ryan, ABC News.
And a sign of life in Lahaina, Hawaii, devastated by the deadly wildfires on Maui. The 150-year-old banyan tree there is now starting to sprout new leaves. Justin Finch, ABC News.
Are you considering having a painful bunion removed? Local doctors would like to talk to you about surgically removing your bunion as part of a research study testing an investigational drug. If you qualify to participate, you'll take part in this study at no cost and may receive compensation for your time and travel. Call Arizona Research Center at 602-773-3040 to learn more about this study and find out if you qualify to have your bunion removed. That's 602-773-3040 or visit their website at azresearchcenter.com.
Housing discrimination. Would you recognize it and report it? These folks did.
My landlord said rent will be cheaper if we're friends with benefits.
Because I'm legally blind, a landlord questioned whether I'd be capable of maintaining an apartment.
Our real estate agent said a different neighborhood with people like us might better suit our family.
If you think you've been discriminated against, contact your local fair housing center.
To file a complaint, visit swfhc.org or call 520-798-1568.
With record-breaking temperatures, you're probably spending more on your electric bill than ever before. Solar might be an option. Hi, I'm Derek, owner at Rooftop Solar, Northern Arizona's largest local installer. Solar can be a great investment, but unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there. If an out-of-town company knocks on your door, make sure you know what you're signing up for. Always get multiple quotes and never sign up at the door. Call 928-213-5670 or visit rooftopsolar.us. Rooftop Solar, your local sunshine source.
LCR Roofing is a leader in commercial and residential repairs and re-roofs for metal, shingle, and flat roofs. They're hiring experienced roofers to join their team. Join the leaders in quality roofing. Log on to lcrroofing.com or give them a call at 928-699-3829.
Call LCR Roofing at 928-699-3829. We'll call you back and be on time. LCRroofing.com.
Back to the Jeff Kennedy Show. Live, local, and legendary.
All right, we are at 7:35 on this beautiful Flagstaff Tuesday morning. Jeff and Monica, we're with you until 9 o'clock, and we are joined on the line for another segment. Dr. Dan McMillan, he is the founder of Saving Democracy in America, also the author of a number of books. Go ahead and Google him. Right now, you can find out everything that you need to know about Dr. Dan, and he has been with us a couple of different times during this show and always very generous with his time. Dr. McMillan, again, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Let's jump back into it, and then I've got some email questions that I want to throw at you.
Good.
All right, so how about this from United Auto Workers President Sean Fain? He said, every fiber in our union is being, and this is in response to former President Trump. It's going to miss the next GOP debate, but he's going to be speaking to a group of like 500 current and former union members that will include not only auto workers, but also plumbers, pipe fitters, and electricians. So Sean Fain says, every fiber in our union is being poured into fighting the billionaire class and an economy that enriches people like Donald Trump at the expense of workers. We can't keep electing billionaires and millionaires that don't have any understanding what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck and struggle to get by and expecting them to solve the problems of the working class. He goes on to say a second Trump term in the White House would be a disaster. Your thoughts, first off, about Sean Fain. He is a union president really fighting for his people. What do they propose? A 46% pay increase, all that stuff. I just want to get your thoughts on his comments about billionaires.
Jeff, the thing is that my effort is strictly nonpartisan, so I don't take a stand on anything other than getting money out of politics. So I don't take a stand on labor relations or this particular strike. And I don't praise or condemn any political leader, whether it's President Trump, President Biden, and so on. I think he's right, however, in saying that we have a political system in which the only people whose interests are represented are millionaires and billionaires and major corporations. On the other hand, I don't see those people as enemies, because it's interesting. Even big business is not getting what it needs from the political system. The political system has gotten so dysfunctional that even heavy campaign donors aren't really getting a whole lot out of it. There's Bernie Sanders likes to say that we live in an oligarchy, as if there's a committee of rich people behind the scenes who run the country to their benefit. And to that, I can only say we should be so lucky, because they need to have some kind of rationality, in our politics. I think that what we have instead in Washington is anarchy, where no one is really being represented, not even the billionaire class. And the political system isn't working for anyone, which is one of the reasons why I think that we absolutely can make this happen. Now, that said, it is true that our political system is that the only people for whom life is, I think, working still fairly well are the wealthiest Americans, the people who can afford to give money, that the rest of us are getting the short end of the stick, have been getting the short end of the stick for decades. But I like to say, I say this whenever I can, that ultimately our fellow Americans are not the enemy. The money's the enemy. And it's the enemy of us all, including even of the donors. I mean, I'm not saying that some of the donors haven't behaved with terrible selfishness, and you look at Big Pharma in particular, you look at Wall Street, there's a lot of bad behavior in our political system, but ultimately I think the fault is really not so much the people in our political system, the players. The fault is just having this crazy money-driven system where our Supreme Court will not let us limit the cost of election campaigns the way they are limited in really every other capitalist democracy. And then all the money that the candidates need for these election campaigns that are so expensive, they get from a small number of Americans who can give it in bulk. And I feel that if we can just flick the switch so that they're getting the money from us instead of from these heavy donors, that then, politicians will behave decently, they will serve us, and the big donors will no longer own the government, and then they will no longer be tempted to enrich themselves at our expense. So that's an overly long answer to your question. But.
No problem. I've got a few more, and these are coming in by email. So one starts with a statement: "One man, one vote." The slogan was notably used by the anti-apartheid movement during the 1980s, which sought to end white minority rule in South Africa. And in the United States, the one-person, one-vote principle was invoked in a series of cases by the Warren Court in the 1960s during the height of related civil rights activities. So the question is, why have an electoral college?
Well, I mean, the Electoral College was, I think, originally built into the original Constitution, and it was, I believe it was demanded by the smaller colonies in joining the original Union, and they saw it as a kind of protection for themselves, as a protection sort of for the separate interests of each state, apart from how citizens would vote. There's no question, I think the Electoral College does does violate the principle of one person, one vote, but more I don't want to get too into it. Again, I don't want to dilute my message. And also even the Electoral College, how you feel about it, has become kind of a partisan issue. So I sort of don't go into it too deeply.
Absolutely. Second question, why is there gerrymandering causing the exclusion of people to vote?
Yes, because, there's gerrymandering because gerrymandering, for those not fully familiar with it, is just where the party in power in a state redraws the electoral districts, that is, the districts for seats in the state legislature as well as congressional districts for the national legislature, in a way that advantages them, either by concentrating all the voters who'd vote against them in a single district so that they only get one rep in Congress, or else breaking up those unfriendly voters across several districts so they will always be outnumbered. But both parties do it, and at the federal level now, of the 435 seats in the House of Representatives, only 40 of those races, or even less, is considered even remotely close to competitive. And what this means, in effect, is that instead of us choosing our elected representatives, our politicians get to choose their voters. That is, they get to choose who's going to vote for them, who their constituents are going to be in their districts, so as to guarantee their incumbency. And both parties do it, and in that way, you could say that in every time we vote for our congressional, for representatives in the House, that probably 80 or 90% of the American people are effectively disenfranchised, because we're going to be in Republican-dominated districts. All the Democrats, their vote doesn't count for anything, because it's a foregone conclusion that the Republicans are going to win, and vice versa, Republican voters in Democratic-drawn districts. And so ending partisan gerrymandering, that's another fully bipartisan issue that I think Americans on both sides of the aisle should be able to get behind.
Absolutely. We're talking with Dr. Dan McMillan. He is the founder of Saving Democracy in America, and he's been being very generous with his time. I have a couple more from our emails, Dr. McMillan. Should there be a law where big business and lobbyists have no financial influence? It should be a financial limit to each presidential candidate. And I know you've touched on this already.
It should be, to each presidential candidate?
There should be a financial limit to each presidential candidate.
There should be, but the Supreme Court won't let us do that. The court decided back in the 70s that money spent to influence elections, to purchase influence in Washington by helping candidates financially, that the money itself is free speech. Up until that point, free speech is what you and I are doing. We state our views. It didn't include the money that you'd use to purchase an audience for your speech, or to drown out everyone else's political speech in a blizzard of TV ads. And then under John Roberts, the court has just taken that bad idea to its most ridiculous conclusion. So that's why the only path to, really game-changing reform, to really fixing this problem, is a public financing mechanism like voter-owned elections. Because, voter-owned elections, not only do we not limit anyone else's so-called speech, but it gives the power of political speech to 168 million registered voters who didn't have it before, because they didn't have enough cash lying around to be giving to politicians.
Amen. Good stuff. Hey, Dr. McMillan, one more, and this is just kind of your general thoughts on, and this has less to do with, dollars spent on elections than just where we are right now as a nation. Do you think we're at that place where we need to have age limits and term limits? That is an or question. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a lot to be said for age limits, and age limits on the courts as well as in the legislature, and for elected officials. On the other hand, I've always been opposed to term limits, because the problem is not how long they stay in office. The problem is what they have to do to get there, namely to raise all this money. When I hear Americans say that they want term limits, I like hearing that, because it shows, that they understand that the system is not representing them. They understand that the incumbents in Washington or in the State House are not serving them. But in a way, if you have term limits, you actually make the problem worse because you have so much turnover in the say the Congress. And although you have turnover in the Congress, the lobbyists are there forever, and they're the ones with the expertise. And it's a lot easier for them to play and manipulate and coerce and control legislators. The other thing I don't like about term limits, it's kind of a statement of lack of faith in the people. I believe in the good sense of the American people, and I think the American people have the right to reelect as often as they want a candidate they think is serving them. The only problem now is that because both parties are captured by the big money, you don't really have much of a choice either way. You're always choosing the lesser of two evils, and both are pretty evil. So, and the other reason I don't like term limits is that politics and government is a very complicated business, and it takes a lot of skill. It takes a long time to get good at it. And when the country faces serious challenges, and we face a lot of challenges in the decades ahead, I really want statesmen and stateswomen in the Congress and in the state houses. I want people who've been there for 20 or 30 years and really know, have perspective and know the history and can see the big picture. So, again, the impulse to want term limits shows, the good sense of the voters, the understanding this isn't working. But it's, in a way, I think the cure is far better than the disease. The better way is to focus on money, on what they have to do to get elected.
Very good. Dr. McMillan, always a pleasure and always insightful to spend this time with you. I am so grateful for your generosity, your willingness to come on and spend this amount of time with us. I will talk to you soon. I look forward to our next conversation on air, and even more so to just getting a chance to call you and chop it up sometime in the near future. Thank you, my friend.
I would love it, Jeff. It is always a pleasure. It's so nice of you to say that I'm generous of my time. You're being generous with your time, and I really appreciate you giving me the chance to put these ideas before our fellow Americans, because I think this is really a good thing for all of us. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I look forward to talking to you again soon, too.
Sounds good. Take care. All right,
Bye-bye.
Dr. Dan McMillan, Saving Democracy in America. Check him out online. I think he's got some really good things to say. And, man, if we could control those campaign dollars, wouldn't that be great for the American people? We'll come back. This is The Legend, 93.5 AM 930.